In February 1980, a man drove from Gateshead to London in a car that probably shouldn't have survived the journey. 5 months earlier, he had been fitting windscreens. Now he was about to audition for ACDC. Bon Scott was dead. Back in Black didn't exist yet. Nobody in that room believed this man from Gateshead belonged there. He had a flat cap, £50 in his pocket, and a voice that could strip paint. For the next 4 decades, Brian Johnson would spend his career answering the same question. Did he? Getting the job, it turned out, was the easy part. Bon Scott died on February 19th, 1980. He was 33 years old, found in the back of a car in London after a night out. Not on a stage, not in a studio, not in any version of the story the mythology would have written for him. Just gone. ACDC had no money. Compass Point Studios in Nassau was booked. Their deal with Atlantic Records was hanging by a thread, and a hole where their voice used to be. Malcolm Young has spoken about the weeks after Scott's death as the darkest of his life. The decision to continue was made out of grief, a conviction that stopping would be a worse betrayal than carrying on, that Bon had built something, and the only honorable move was to keep it moving. Do you stop, or do you keep going? The answer would change rock history. Auditions began, coordinated by manager Peter Mensch. There were bigger names, safer names, singers with record deals and recent chart history. Brian Johnson had none of that. He wasn't at the top of any list. The connection traced back partly to Scott himself. Bon had seen Geordie play in 1973 and told Johnson directly that he was one of the best rock singers he'd encountered. Johnson drove down from Tyneside, walked into Easy Hire rehearsal studio, and sang Whole Lotta Rosie. One song, a few minutes. Decades of history changed direction. The decision was made within minutes. Brian Johnson got the job. That should have been the end of the story. Instead, it marked the beginning of a question he'd spent decades trying to answer. Was he good enough? Had he even earned the right to be standing there? He wasn't joining a band in transition. He was stepping into the space left by a dead friend, an album named after that loss, a black cover in mourning, songs that would always be measured against someone who wasn't there to sing them. For years, Johnson hid that pressure behind humor, warmth, and the self-deprecating laugh that arrived whenever conversations got too close to something real. The flat cap, the Geordie accent, the working-class directness that kept interviewers comfortable and kept everything else out of reach. He kept the surface accessible so the inside could stay protected. In his memoir, The Lives of Brian, published in 2023, he writes about standing in that rehearsal room before the audition and understanding with complete clarity what the room had recently lost, not therapeutic language, the language of a working man who assessed the situation and decided to get on with it. His father, Alan Johnson, a former sergeant major, had taught him a simple rule: you don't perform your feelings, you do your job. Brian Johnson absorbed that so completely it became indistinguishable from who he was. The strategy for Back in Black was not to replace Bon Scott. It was to be so unambiguously himself. Geordie vowels, flat cap, zero pretension. That comparison became structurally difficult. He couldn't compete with a ghost, so he never tried. He walked into a different room entirely and started working. Back in Black was recorded at Compass Point Studios in Nassau in the spring of 1980. Mutt Lange ran sessions with a precision Johnson had never encountered. Takes repeated until they were right. The sound required a specific kind of vocal violence, screaming placed with exactness, lines landing over Angus Young's guitar parts that left almost no room to breathe. Johnson has said his voice was destroyed and rebuilt over those 6 weeks. The album came out on July 25th, 1980. You Shook Me All Night Long became ACDC's first major American hit. Then the numbers arrived. 50 million copies sold, more than Rumours, more than The Wall, second only to Thriller in the history of recorded music. Back in Black made Brian Johnson a star. It also trapped him inside a question he could never fully escape. If you've never seen this channel before, this is what we do. We take the icons everyone thinks they know and show you who they actually were. Subscribe if that's what you're here for. Would he always be Bon Scott's replacement? The question never went away. Not after the sales figures, not after the tours, not after years of evidence that the band had not only survived losing their singer, but built something larger in the time that followed. The NME and the broader UK music press never fully made their peace with him. Too working class for serious critics, too successful to dismiss. Johnson responded by giving them nothing to grab onto, talking about cars, his daughters, his mother Esther's Italian cooking. The surface stayed warm. The interior stayed protected. Entering AC/DC had been the easy part. Proving he deserved it would become the hardest work of his life. We cover stories like this every week, the version of these lives that didn't make the official record. If you're not subscribed yet, now is a good time. For every problem, he had the same solution. Show up, work harder. Then, in 2016, he faced the first problem effort couldn't solve. A C/DC was midway through the Rock or Bust World Tour when doctors told Johnson that continuing at the decibel level stage monitoring required would result in total, permanent hearing loss. He was pulled from the remaining dates. Axl Rose stepped in to finish them. The press treated it as a footnote. Johnson experienced it as something closer to an identity crisis. In The Lives of Brian, he describes the fear not as fear of not working, but fear of not hearing music, that the thing organizing his entire adult life might simply become unreachable. Had he spent 40 years proving he belonged, only to lose it like this? Instead of accepting retirement, Brian Johnson did something he'd done his entire life. He went back to work. Not as a singer, as part of the engineering team trying to save his hearing. He worked with audiologist Stephen Ambrose to build a new kind of in-ear monitoring system, technology that would let him hear music without destroying what remained of his hearing. For the first time in his career, Brian Johnson wasn't just solving a problem. He was helping invent the solution. He came back, and when he returned, the band was grieving again. 40 years earlier, grief had brought him into ACDC. Now grief was asking the same question. Do you stop? Or do you keep going? In November 2020, Power Up was released, dedicated to Malcolm Young, who had died in 2017 after a long struggle with dementia. Johnson returned as lead vocalist alongside Angus Young. The album reached #1 in multiple countries. He was 72 years old, standing in front of microphones at Warehouse Studios in Vancouver, doing the same job he'd been handed 4 decades earlier. Another founding architect gone. Another decision made out of grief to keep the thing moving. Another album carrying the weight of someone no longer in the room, and somehow, after everything, it was still the same voice carrying the weight. Johnson's father never told him he was proud of him. He has said this across 3 decades of interviews, not with bitterness, but with the acceptance of a man who understood the code his father lived by. You don't say it, you show it by doing the work. That is the sentence that explains everything about Brian Johnson. He didn't get the job in 1980 because he was the obvious choice. He got it because he walked into a room full of grief, opened his mouth, and sang like a man with nothing left to lose. Which, at that point, was exactly what he was. 32 years old, no contract, no safety net, no guarantee that any of it would work. Whenever grief showed up, he showed up. Whenever doubt showed up, he showed up. Whenever criticism showed up, he showed up. And when his own body started to fail him, he showed up then too. 4 decades, people asked whether Brian Johnson deserved the job. 50 million albums, thousands of concerts, 40 years of showing up. At some point, the question answered itself. Brian Johnson didn't replace Bon Scott, he became irreplaceable.